Hello everyone and welcome back to Captain Patriotic. Now, how are you guys doing today? Now, as you'll recall last time, we talked about the similarities and differences between the 1918 flu pandemic and the current COVID-19 pandemic that we are all experiencing at the moment. Well, today I want to shift our focus a little bit to the Vietnam War. Specifically, I want to talk about the Battle of Hamburger Hill. Now, this particular battle isn't a very well-known battle like Khe Sanh, the Tet Offensive, or even Way City. However, this particular battle was important in that it changed the views of the American public for support for the war in Vietnam. It was essentially a climax for the American troops that were fighting over there to combat communist forces over in that part of the world during that time. And it is the public's reaction to this particular battle that would go on to be documented and seen in movies, documentaries, and even video games that would represent the Vietnam War as a whole. Hamburger Hill wasn't just one of the bloodiest moments of the Vietnam War, but it also served as a turning point for the American support of our troops fighting in Vietnam, in that it changed the way that the military changed their tactics to try to win this battle, and of course it would shape public opinion afterwards. Now, to the military, Hamburger Hill did not have a bunch of significance to it, but it was a part of an operation called Operation Apache Snow, which was the U.S. military's effort to sweep the Aju Valley of Vietnam, which is in the northern part of the country, and Hamburger Hill was located about a mile away from the Laos border. Now, part of this operation was to infiltrate any Viet Cong operations that were coming across the border into Vietnam in order to terrorize certain parts of the valley, such as Way City or Da Nang and other important U.S.-held cities for that matter. And it basically was made to stop the Viet Cong in their tracks before they would trek further down to the capital in the southern part of the country. Now, the particular battle started on May 10th, 1969, whenever Colonel Comey's 101st Airborne 3rd Brigade infiltrated the valley to start this operation. Well, needless to say, when they invaded that small, dense valley of jungle and brush and everything, they would not realize that it would become such a bloody battle for the next week and a half or so. Among the forces available to Comey were the 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry Regiment, the 2nd Battalion, 501st Infantry Regiment, as well as the 1st Battalion, 506th Infantry Regiment. Now, supporting units that would go support all of those units in the battle were the 9th U.S. Marine Regiment, as well as the 3rd Brigade, 5th Cavalry Regiment, as well as elements of the ARVN soldiers, the South Vietnamese soldiers that would support U.S. troops throughout the war. And the particular battle started when ARVN troops cut off the road leading to the hill right there, basically creating a distraction. And while this is all going on, the Marines and the 5th Cavalry were about to storm up the hill. Now, the task of destroying Viet Cong forces in the valley was given to the 3rd Brigade, who was basically ordered to take down any enemy soldier that was trying to make resistance in that particular area. Now, because Comey's troops were air mobile, they basically were up in the air in helicopters floating around the whole area, where their job was to serve as backup support for if there was any heavy resistance in a particular part of the battle. The battle really started to give way and really started to heighten up on May 11th, whenever the 187th got closer to the foothill of Hill 937. Now, it was on this particular day that one of the most tragic moments of the battle would take place. Lieutenant Colonel Honeycutt had control of the 187th Infantry Regiment, which included both Charlie and Bravo Company, which he promptly sent to the bottom of the hill, with both of them going in different directions. Now, Bravo Company came under a bunch of heavy fire and resistance, so much so that they called in air support from gunships to support them. Well, when the airships got there, they accidentally mistaken the landing zone that was used for the 187th Infantry Regiment for an enemy encampment. So, not knowing that who all was there, they basically opened fire on everybody that was there in that area, which unfortunately ended up being their own soldiers. Now, because of this open fire, 2 soldiers ultimately get killed from those gunfire, and about 3 dozen more are severely injured from all that firepower. Now, sadly, this wouldn't be the last time that our planes mistook our soldiers for the enemy, but after that, the 187th, they would dig into trenches just to make sure that nothing like this would happen for the rest of the battle. And after they did that, they basically camped out there for a whole night. Now, I want you to pause for a minute and just imagine that you're a soldier fighting in these very dense jungles with everything and anything going on around you. During the day, it's scary enough, but at night, when there's no light to see where everything is, you don't know if the enemy could be standing right behind you, beside you, or even right in front of your eyes. Now, it was very common during the Vietnam War for the Viet Cong to use guerrilla tactics, which basically meant that they wouldn't use whole units to try to attack a position. They would send maybe one or maybe a handful of enemy out to a particular fortification to see where the enemy is, and if they felt brave enough, they would ultimately attack the soldiers on site. So, if you're a soldier serving in Vietnam at this point, you're like, oh, there's no easing up, because you just had to be tense all the time because one of the greatest threats was like, well, if you let your guard down, there's a possibility that you could die and you wouldn't even know where it came from. So this must have been what was going in all through those soldiers' heads during this particular battle. Now, the next couple of days were characterized by Honeycutt trying to push what was left of his troops into formation to form one last final assault against the Viet Cong. However, the terrain was so difficult to maneuver because the jungle was so thick and it was very mountainous and all those things, which made it very difficult for the soldiers to advance on the enemy, much less hold a position from enemy that was coming down the hill trying to attack you. Now, the enemy took this to their advantage in that they constructed a series of bunkers and trenches all throughout this valley, which made it even more difficult for our soldiers to infiltrate the enemy at that particular point, because you never would know if you were about to step into an enemy trench line or you were going to step into a booby trap left by the Viet Cong. As the battle shifted to Hill 937, Honeycutt shifted the 506th Infantry Regiment to the southern side of the hill, and Honeycutt airlifted Bravo Company to that particular area to back them up. So while this is going on, Honeycutt orders even more attacks against the enemy positions on May 14th and 15th, which resulted in very little success for the soldiers to gain any territory or movement up the hill. And it was because of the thick jungle, again, that progress was very limited, and that they couldn't tell where the enemy was, or they couldn't move troops easily. Finally, on May 18th, Comey coordinates an attack with the 187th and the 506th Infantry Regiments, where he instructs both of them to attack the hill both from the north and the south. Now, the 187th almost succeed in the battle, but they had to pull back because of getting heavy casualties. However, at the same time, the 506th Infantry Regiment was able to take the southern tip of Hamburger Hill, which was very good in our opinion. But because the 187th had been suffering all these casualties and everything, the 101st Airborne Commander, Major General Melvin Sayus, orders 3 more battalions to come assist in the battle immediately in order to relieve the 187th. On May 20th, Comey and Sayus launch a major attack on the hill about 10 o'clock that morning, which included elements of the 101st Airborne Division, as well as a few soldiers from the 187th Infantry Regiment. And between all the forces, they were able to take that hill in 2 hours, and by 5 o'clock that afternoon, the hill was totally under U.S. and ARVN control. Now, what's significant about Hamburger Hill is that it was such a bloody battle for just a short period of time. Experts estimate that about 70 U.S. soldiers die in the battle, as well as over 350 of them being injured during the battle. Now, however, the enemy, the Viet Cong, suffer way more casualties than what our side suffers, with over 630 casualties altogether. So, I guess you could say that Hamburger Hill was a hard-win victory for the U.S., or at least it seemed that way for a while. But what's most interesting about Hamburger Hill is that 2 weeks later, on June 5th, 1969, the 101st Airborne Division just up and leaves the hill. I mean, to this day, they don't understand why they left the hill, but it was basically a lot of backlash for the military and from the people back home because it was covered in the news so much. Even to this day, people are like, why did they fight for 10 days to claim a piece of property that would only be left behind 2 weeks later? So, in short, the unpopularity of this particular battle as a whole would go on to influence the overall negative feelings from the American public for the U.S. support in Vietnam. And basically, Hamburger Hill proved to the U.S. that we needed to change our strategy for combating the North Vietnamese. But in some ways, the American public and the military knew that by this point, we knew that Vietnam would almost be unwinnable for us because over the last few years, we hadn't gained much territory whatsoever. Hamburger Hill was important in that it was a basic turning point for American involvement in Vietnam, in that it created a bunch of negative feelings against the war, which ultimately would lead the U.S. to start withdrawing their troops in the early 70s, and eventually, with no support from the U.S., the South Vietnamese would fall to North Vietnam in 1975, which would lead to the end of the Vietnam War. So, if you like the content of this video, or if you have any questions, please feel free to like, subscribe, and leave any comments down below, and I'd be happy to answer them. So, thank you guys for tuning in, and please stay tuned in for next time. Thank you.